Hey, welcome out everybody to tonight's Tax Sale Titans podcast episode here. This is episode 19, and we will be discussing a number of interesting topics tonight. We're happy to have you with us. Of course, it'll be myself and Stephen Swenson. We'll be conducting the training tonight. And just a quick review of what we're going to be covering. So we're going to do a post-sale review of North Carolina sale. Following that, we're going to do a training tip for redemption deeds. And then we're going to look at upcoming sale in Connecticut, a bad deal review in California, maybe even a couple of those, and then we'll take some Q&A from members.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited to have you guys here for us, and we think we have some interesting auctions to look at some properties that have sold. What we're trying to expose to you guys each week with the podcast are the opportunities that are coming up, the opportunities that just took place, and also give you guys some knowledge about tax sale investing and different type of topics. But before we do that, we want to give a special thanks to all of our coaching members, our program members, even our YouTube members or followers on our YouTube channels. We appreciate you guys coming and looking to us to learn about tax sale investing. So we definitely want to give out a thanks to all of our membership and followers.
Yeah, we notice you coming week after week, to the trainings or the efforts that you're making there. We definitely notice many of you that are very faithful in doing that. Now, also, we have a couple of 3-day events coming up here, 3-day boot camps, which are really 3 full days to cover not only tax sale investing, but how it relates to other forms of real estate. And we look at local markets as well. And so it's 3 days full of training. And not only that, but we also provide booths like that. It's a lot of fun. If you are in Orange County, we will be out there this coming weekend here, so the 20th to the 22nd in Orange County, and the weekend after that, it will be Orlando, Florida. So for members, tickets are only $2.99, and if you live in either of those areas and you are interested in coming out, please let us know so that we can reserve a seat for you. We still have a few left, and we would love to have any of you attend if you can make it.
Absolutely. We really do believe it's the best value in tax sale education. We're going to go through all of the things that we don't have time to do in a podcast or in a training. We also expose you to other forms of real estate investing as well. So like Shade said, if you're interested, let us know and we can go ahead and get you that discounted ticket. Now, what we're going to be doing and talking about here in first is we're going to talk about North Carolina. And we're going to look at some different properties that have sold over the last couple of months in a couple of different areas, and also go over an overview of how North Carolina works, because there's kind of a little trick with North Carolina that most people don't know about.
Yeah, North Carolina is classified as a tax deed state, meaning that they have a redemption period they wait out, and then the county forecloses on the property. One of the big differences with North Carolina, I mean, they use premium bidding just like many other states do. They have live auctions and I don't know if they have any online auctions yet. Now that I'm thinking about it, but
they have a couple that they do through. So occasionally they will, but they do them through one of the public surpluses, and so I'll include them. I think there's a couple of them right now, but they don't. There's not any of the big sales.
Yeah, that makes sense. The one thing that is a little bit different about what they do, though, is what they call an upset bid. And upset bids are essentially their way of closing out auctions. When you place a high bid for a period of 10 days, another bidder can come and increase or upset your bid, as the winning bidder. And so basically the end of the auction tends to go from upset bidder to upset bidder until the high bid is established, which obviously it takes a little bit of time because there's that 10-day window of time, where anybody could place a higher bid, but it also kind of creates a secondary investment opportunity for investors, to pick up properties that already went to the auction.
Yeah, exactly. So there's kind of drawbacks, but there's some positives as well. Obviously, if you do the upset bid, that gives us an opportunity to, in many of these areas, to bid on property without actually attending the auction. And so that's a strategy that some of our students are implementing in some of these areas. Now, if it does go to an upset bid, or what that upset bid is, it's right after the sale for up to 10 days, anyone can go ahead and submit an offer. Now, the offer needs to be 10% for the first $1,000 and 5% per thousand after that. I've also seen some areas where they've done 750 to 10%, but essentially you need to do a little bit more of a bid than was the original bid amount. And then what will happen is that will set up another 10-day period. So there's properties, in fact, we even include some of the upset bid list on our auction calendar, because these are still going to be available. These are still kind of in the process of being sold. So sometimes you'll see these and it may take us a couple of months before the high bidder is essentially established. Sometimes the properties will go ahead and win and nobody will do an upset bid. But it does kind of hinder the fact that you're not going to automatically acquire the property if you're that high bidder. But it also gives us a chance to bid on some of these properties even if we didn't attend the auction.
Yeah, especially, I mean, something else that's interesting about North Carolina is they have a lot of small cells. They're smaller cells that they tend to have. I don't know if that's just uh, the counties here, but there tends to be a little bit smaller cells, and they're mostly conducted in person still. So, for instance, if you live in the North Carolina area, then absolutely there are sales, that you could attend in person, to participate, and you're just limited to competing against whoever else is, probably some other locals that have been attending that sale for a while, but not going to be competing with people nationwide. So there can be some good opportunities in those sales to pick up properties.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go look at some properties that have sold recently in the tax sale, and go ahead and show my screen. Okay. Oh, I've got the wrong screen there. Let me pull this one over here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at a number of different properties that essentially have sold. This first one here ended up selling this last month. It's a single family home. We can see some of the information about it. The county has an assessed value of about $60,000 on it. We can see it's about 1,200 square feet, built in 1975. Now this property ended up selling for $11,500, and we'll look into a little bit of the property details.
Yeah, that seems pretty cheap. I mean, it's not that old.
Now, one thing that's kind of interesting, and we're going to look at some that are currently on the market, but this one actually sold. And we can kind of tell by looking at this information what happened to this property. So this was purchased in October of 2025, and it sold in November of 2025. It may have been purchased in the end of September when it finally went through.
Yeah, but they essentially, the buyer basically sold it the following month.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and they didn't do anything to it. You can see all that they may have done is they weed whacked the front of the yard. They went ahead and posted it for $25,000 over what they paid, and then they sold it as is.
Yeah, they actually did a pretty good job of just making it more sellable, kind of clearing up the yard a bit and cleaning things up a little bit there and just relisting it. That's what we would suggest in a lot of cases, because we tend to get in at a low enough price that we don't have to rehab or remodel properties. We can usually sell them based on just our buying alone, if you just make it more presentable.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So here we can see this from 2024. They just went ahead and accessed the property, changed the locks, turned around and sold it quickly and made 20 plus $1,000 on it. Now maybe it'd be worth it to fix it up and clean it up, but sometimes it's just better to move on to and go ahead and sell it. Here's the next property that we're going to be looking at.
And was that a lien, or was it? That's just we're talking about. That's North Carolina deed.
Yeah, these are tax deeds that were acquired. So they just purchased that one for 11,000, turned around and sold it for 35,000.
Oh, sorry, my brain got mixed up with the last webinar there for a second.
Yeah, yeah. So this is, a tax deed that was purchased in North Carolina. This was purchased for $9,276. We can see some of the kind of details in it. About 2,000 square feet. The county has a value of about 87,000.
But clearly, it was a pretty good deal. This one looks nice.
Well, you can see that it needs some work, but it definitely has a plenty of value when they picked it up for, $9,200. Now, one thing I was looking at it, you can see that it needs work. Obviously, we have some stuff boarded up, but what I was concerned about was, is the roof, and is the roof okay? And you can see that the roof, probably can use some things to it, but it does have a newer roof on it, and then it's also brick, and it's valued at about 144,000.
Yeah, we're suckers for brick homes. We do love, a little small brick home like that. And the roof on it is a good sign. Even if it needs additional work, at least you have somebody that was investing money into it to, to fix the condition, to make it more usable. And so that's usually what we're looking for. Just signs that somebody has invested some money into it at some point to care for it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So if it picked up for under 10,000, has a value of 144,000, let's say 150 once it's rehabbed. Let's say that they put 40,000 into it. They're into it at 50,000, they have a chance to make 100,000. Even if they were to put, 80,000 into it, they'd still have, or 60,000 into it, they'd still have, a good opportunity to double their money, if not, triple their money, depending on the deal.
Yeah, that's a good deal. It's
It,
making me jealous of opportunities there.
Yeah, yeah. Here's another property that was picked up. You can see the county records are a little bit different per county record. But
Oh,
here,
that's really nice.
yeah, now this one was picked up. They paid a little bit more for this property. They paid 20 grand for it.
Oh, that still is. That's awesome.
Yeah, and here's what the property is valued at about 150. So at 20 grand, what we always say is we're looking at, we are judging the book by the cover. So in looking here at the roof looks great. The brick looks great.
Well, and I didn't see what year it was built in that, what was it, 64. Well, one thing you can tell about this property is, it very much looks like a 1964 property, but it's one that has been, looks like, continuously updated and, kept in good condition. I wouldn't be surprised if there are long-term or long-time owners, but you can see just the general condition of the property is better than average. And uh, I mean, for that reason alone, it would be worth paying 20,000, for this property, because I don't think it's going to need the same level of work that maybe some of the other properties might. You can probably get by with a very limited rehab on this one, or no rehab at all, and still do 100,000 plus on this property. I mean, the buyers that picked it up for 20,000, if they walk away at that price, they'll easily do that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, a great deal. You know, you can see the house next door needs a little work. In fact, that actually looks almost exactly like one of the houses that we own in Arkansas. It's the red brick with the two windows. I was like, oh my goodness, that looks just like one of the houses we got. But you can see that there's some nice homes in the area. So overall, I think was a pretty good deal.
Yeah, they did so well on that. I mean, they essentially picked it up for 15% of value, which it probably would have been worth paying double that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Here is the next property right here, and it's this one right over here.
That's another nice looking house.
Yeah, and this one was picked up for $10,673.
Oh my goodness. I had no idea North Carolina had such good deals going on.
Yeah, well, what's kind of interesting is some of these went through a process of upset bidding. So, a lot of these didn't sell necessarily right there at the the first time, there were some upset bids that went above that.
Well, and maybe people can understand what we mean now by saying, there's additional opportunities that come up with the upset bids as well, because as we're looking at any of these properties, like, would it be worth, doing an upset bid on that property at 20,000? You bet it would. Would this one be worth it? Absolutely. I mean, all of these would be worth doing upset bids because they all of these properties are very similar in their characteristics and in the types of, and we love properties like this. This is probably a property that's been owned by an older person that's lived there for a long time and kept great condition of it, or taking good care of it. That's the perfect property. It's got new roof on it. It has brick, and it's probably been updated on the inside just like it has been updated on the outside. And that's what we like about it.
Exactly. It was built in 1972, so even though it's a bit older, still in pretty good shape. Get an idea of kind of the homes within the area. We can see some here that have been rehabbed. So really not a bad little house picked up at a pretty good overall price.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, every single one of those last properties I would jump on, in a heartbeat, and I'd pay 5,000 over, that price on any of them. It would be worth it. Oh, this one's got interior images.
Yeah, included the Google because we could go back. That's the reason we always check both, is to see because maybe one of them might have some photos. Now these are probably old photos, but it still gives us an idea. We can see that, in a way it probably needs a rehab, but there's things about this that you could keep, by changing, I mean, even keeping that wood by changing the flooring, lighting up the flooring, adding some different lights to it. You could really revitalize this and take it from this, this old 70s feeling into a more modern feeling just by painting. And you could even keep some of this cabinetry just refreshing the paint would give this property a whole new life and get you closer to that $155,000 asking price.
You know what was kind of interesting with that property? Look at those images again. So I think that they took what was originally like an outside balcony area and ended up finishing it off with windows and enclosing the door right there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and then probably this section maybe up here in the front right here.
Uh, I love wood paneling walls, and I love that ceiling.
Yeah, you could definitely, modern it and give it a whole new modern feel. Or it might be better, if instead of setting up a whole power team there is just to go ahead and wholesale it or go through quiet title, clean it up and sell it. That's one of the advantages. We don't always have to rehab these properties. If we get them at the right price, we can resell it to somebody else that's going to do the rehab for us. And we're giving it to them for a discount. They're going ahead and buy it. They can you know, do the rehab. We get a chance to make money. They get a chance to make money, an all around pretty good situation. Here's the next property, and it's actually this house right here. Let's see what they ended up paying up for this one. They ended up paying $27,562.
Holy cow! If that is paying up in North Carolina, we've got to get to some North Carolina sales because that is exactly what we love to see. That's a really nice uh, manufacturer mobile home, like a double wide setup there, um, on a foundation. It looks like.
Yeah, well, it's considered real property, so it's on a foundation. It's a full structure. Really, it's not even really a mobile home. It's just a prefab home. It looks like to me. It looks like you've got some type of foundation there underneath it.
Yeah, maybe a good lot too.
Yeah, here's the property. You can see it's 3 bedroom, 2 bath. It was built in 1999,
Oh
and
wow.
they valued it at about 140. So picking it up for $27,562 is really a pretty good deal, especially when we're looking at the condition. Now this is from 2023. We would of course get an on-site evaluation before, buying it, but it's also on a good sized lot. This is an easy property to pick up. Picked it up for the right price, turn around and sell it and make a great profit.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, uh, it's an awesome deal they picked up at such a low price there at 20,000. They could rent this property out probably for, I'm guessing, $1,000 to $1,500 a month, somewhere in that range. So based on the prices that they paid alone, I mean, they paid less than 20% for the property to acquire it, and it has the potential to bring that in just income, in rental income, in like a year and a half, maybe 2 years. So that's incredibly fast for a property like this, and you would still own the property and could continue renting it out as it goes up and increases in value. So you'd be making money through the appreciation as well. Every single one of these little homes we looked at in North Carolina would be perfect for rentals.
Yeah, exactly. Here's the next property we'll look at right here. You'll see that they're valued at around 82,000. It's a single family home. And we'll always check and look into, some of the sales information. This actually has some of the properties that have sold within the area. So these are going to be good comparables that we can use. There's no photo on it, but we'll look at some of this information and find out more about it, obviously, before purchasing it. But this is the property right here. And one thing that's interesting about it is that it is currently for sale. So they picked it up they actually really paid up for this one. They ended up paying 60 grand for it. But it looks like to me all they've done is secured the property and they're reselling it as is for 125. So they're looking to make, you know, what, 40, yes, 60,000 on it. So, and you can see that it hasn't been rehabbed. They haven't done anything. They haven't even added, new appliances or anything like that. They're just kind of selling it as is. You can see the floor still needs to be worked on. So rehab this property is probably going to be closer to about 200, but they're just trying to sell it as they picked it up. They were into it 60 grand, so maybe they're into it 65 grand and they're just looking to make a quick 60 on it.
Yeah, I think it also illustrates pretty well what we talk about when we talk about setting your max bids and not overpaying, too much for the properties, because obviously, at 60,000, they did pay up for the property, and I'm sure they'll still be able to sell it here, no problem. They'll be able to make money on it, but clearly, it they have more limited options at 60,000 than they would if they paid a little bit less than that. If they were able to pick up this property for 35 or 40,000, it would be a lot easier for them to move, and there may be additional profitability in it. It would make it worth it to fix it up a bit, in order to sell it. Because it doesn't look like it needs that much work. I mean, this is the kind of property you could probably do a lipstick rehab on and make it look excellent. It'd probably be a really good candidate for that if you wanted to put the time into it. Or if you paid a good low price, you could just turn around and sell it. Even at 60,000, they'll still be able to probably double their money.
Yeah, well, I think at the 125 they're asking, it obviously is going to need a new roof. It's going to need a full rehab. So I think this house is worth over 100,000 that they're asking for it. But they just listed it for sale. It's only been listed for sale for a little bit. I think they're just trying to blow it out. If they can make an extra 60, they can double up their money on a deal, then it's going to be worth it for them to sell it quickly. Maybe it's because they're out of state investor. Maybe it's just some local guy who wants to get his money out of it quickly. But, they're going to they're selling it at that price knowing that it's going to need a full rehab and the new roof.
Well, and if you think about it, when would it not be worth it to buy and double up your money within a month? Yeah, I think that would almost always, be worth it, especially if you paid more for a property than you wanted to. Then doubling up on your money, it would be a great thing. If you pay low enough prices, you can do better than doubling up your money. But again, you can't do that with every single deal. These are great examples, though, of properties that were picked up at amounts ranging from $10,000 up to $60,000 on homes that are all profitable and all have, good rental potential as well. These have been really impressive tax sale properties.
Yeah, they are interesting. Here's another property that ended up selling. It's actually this property right here, but a lot of the property value is actually in the land. This one they ended up paying up a bit for as well. They ended up paying $35,000 for this one. But really, a lot of the value is that this is on 5.5 acres. There's still some value in this little home, and it would be a pretty easy home to go ahead and rehab and fix up. but really the 5.5 acres in this area is where a majority of this $220,000 value is. So even at this, they picked it up for 20 cents on the dollar, something like that, with this big 5-acre lot.
Yeah, it's another screaming deal where, I mean, at 35,000, yeah, they're under 20% for it. And there's a ton of profitability. I mean, yeah, they could make 150,000 plus on, on a property like this. And we do like this simplicity of the house itself. And, at least if we're going to deal with it with an older house, we at least want it to be small and simple, so that fixing it up is not going to be overly complicated.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, and they've got this massive lot. Somebody might buy this property and put on a brand new big home. But it goes all the way down here and all the way back there. So really, really good piece of land. I mean, the land itself, looking at some of the comps in the area, 5 acres was going for over 100 grand,
Mm.
150 grand. So I think the land itself is really gonna be a good buy for them. Here's another one of the properties. You can see built in 1970. It's about 1,700 square feet. And here's the property right
Oh,
here.
wow, that's really nice too.
And they actually paid $4,100 for this property.
What? 4,100?
Yeah,
Oh, I'm gonna be sick.
yep, 4,100.
It's got to be worth 150,000.
Well, it's about worth about 105. So it makes a little bit, and you can see that the roof needs some work. But back here, this photo's a couple of years old, but it's still being lived in. We're still at a brick home, and Zillow, I think, has this home between 105 to 125, depending on which one you're looking at.
That's
But for five
insane.
grand,
I mean, they could turn around and list it at 50 and make 10 times their money on it and probably sell it quick.
yeah, well, it was built in 1970. It's on a full 1 acre lot. It's 3 bedroom, 1 bath, 1,000 square feet. This is an easy home to do what Shade was talking about earlier, doing a lipstick rehab. Now, maybe we have to improve the roof or repair the roof. That's, maybe we're into it 20 grand after that. You turn around and sell it for, 110, 120. You could still make between 70 to 80, 90 grand on it. Or like Shade said, you could go ahead and sell it as is, sell it for 50 or 60,000, and then at that deal, that's going to be worth it for another investor to go ahead and pick that property up and rehab it because there's still going to be profit for them. So that's our strategy. We're trying to sell it as quickly as possible so that we can take our funds and put them back into more property. So our money is constantly making our money, making us more money. We're not just sitting on it.
Oh, and by the way, Michael, you're wondering where this list came from. I think we pulled this list from the auction calendar. It was just at the bottom of the auction calendar for I think it was like the 4th of next month.
Yeah, well, this one, actually, I was wrong. This one is this one right here is at $4,100 right now. It's going through upset bid.
Oh,
So it's at $4,100 now. Yeah, this is actually, I looked at a couple of different counties, because I had to go back into past sales. So these, there's going through Scotland County and Guilford County, a couple of different counties. But this one here, this is the reason I forgot to mention it. This one is currently an upset bid, and we're going to look at one more that's in the upset bid. So this particular property in Scotland County is on the upset sell list. So if you go look for Scotland County, this would be a property that essentially within the next 10 days, within the next probably few days, they'll either have somebody else do an upset bid at a higher percentage and then it'll go for another 10 days, or if nobody does, then they would go ahead and own the property and win it at that point.
well, and you would think at $4,500, that it would get an increased bid, or that people might bid up that price a bit, and that it could still end up in the auction for a little bit. No, I think the North Carolina auctions are on site only.
Most of these are all going to be on-site auctions. Now they do have some online auctions, But the ones that we're looking at right now are some of the results through some of the on-site auctions that were taking place.
So if you do live there, really, I mean, that's how these people are getting these opportunities, is because they're the only locals, that are attending the sale and that can bid on some of this stuff. So, the fact that you have to be there in order to place an upset bid, puts you within, a rare, small group of people that have the ability to even do that. And so, yeah, I mean, I would say that Michael, and also anybody else that's from North Carolina, it would be a great idea to track down and to track some of these sales, because obviously they have some really good deals that are happening, and they're still doing it on site and in person, which it's only going to happen for so much longer before they switch over to an online auction system like everybody else.
Yeah, well, and this upset bid system makes it unique out of any other state. So even out-of-staters many times can try bidding on these properties without attending the auction, as long as the county will allow anyone to go ahead and do an upset bid. So, this property could still be into play. In fact, we're going to look at one more property here. We can see that the county has valued it at 1.5 or $1.6 million. You can see that it has over 80 acres. In fact, if we look at the land itself,
My goodness, 80 acres.
why is it not working?
Oh, it's 104 acres.
Yeah, 104 acres. And then, the home, we can look a little bit more
It was
at.
built in 2007, so it's a new house too.
Yeah.
It's like a 6 bedroom, or no, it's 4 bedroom, 4 bath.
Yeah, in fact, let me grab that parcel number and we'll look at the map quick. This will be the last one we look at before we go back over, but I think it's interesting to look at the GIS map on it. What?
I think you've got something else recorded on it. You probably need to recopy it.
I was looking at it earlier.
I think it's just extra space or something.
That may be true. Well, let me try one other way. I'll look by the name. If not, we'll just go look at it either way.
You missed one of the numbers. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so it's on both sides of that street, we can see. And it's a lot of farmland. You can see that at least half of it is currently being farmed, and then you can see the residential lot right down there. That it looks very nice. That's an amazing house. This is, say, $1.2 million, what the county says it's worth.
I think it was 1. We can go look
Well,
at it.
and what is the opening bid amount for it?
Well, it's an upset bid right now at $49,041. So about $49,000 an upset bid.
Oh, so most of the properties we've looked at tonight have been properties that are valued between, like, 100,000 and 200,000. But if this property actually goes to auction, which I don't know if it will or not, I mean, it doesn't seem like
It's already an auction. It's an upset bid.
Yeah, I guess
they've already lost their chance to redeem the property because it's already been sold in the upset bid. It's just whoever's going to do a higher upset bid could have the chance of picking it up.
Could you imagine owning like a $1.2 million property without any liens against it and losing it to a foreclosure, for less than $30,000 or $40,000? That is pretty insane. But clearly, I mean, this property would be worth, I mean, this kind of property you could pay a good high percentage for. You could pay 50% for this property and it would probably still make sense, but I don't think it's going to sell for anywhere near there. It's only at 40,000 right now. I'd be surprised if this property sells for more than 300,000.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to go through a series of upset bid offers on it. But, to kind of get an idea of what it is here, we can kind of see it. And you can see it's all of this farmland on both sides. And as we go down and take a closer look, it really is kind of a mansion.
Yeah, it's like 6,000 or 7,000 square feet and on a whole bunch of land. Yeah, is like a compound there. Yeah. So the upset bid, to explain this to you again, it is in the same way, you know how some auctions have an extended period for the ending on it, where if it gets a bid, it will extend it for another few minutes. Well, that's kind of what the upset bid is for North Carolina, only rather than it being an online system that's for a few minutes, it's kind of an in-person system that is for 10 days. So it just means that they hold the sale and there will be a high bidder that will leave the sale, but there's a 10-day period after that where another bidder can come in with a higher bid. And when they place their bid, it starts another 10-day, upset bid period there, where if another bidder wants to bid higher, they have that 10-day period to do that, and they could bid it up again. But once the 10-day period comes and goes, then they will, award you, or basically say you're the winner of the property once it's been 10 days without an upset bid coming in. And so it's basically how they establish a high bidder after the auction. So you've got the opportunity to win the properties at auction, but then you also have an opportunity to win the properties after the auction in upset sales. And we've seen multiple properties that would have been worth bidding on in the upset sales tonight. All of those would have been worth throwing out prices on.
Yeah, definitely. So what we wanted to show you is there's good opportunity, and really, if we look into every state, there's going to be some good opportunities. It may not be every auction, but if we look over at a period of time, and so a lot of the states that you're in, if we're in a redemption deed state or a tax deed state, it's worth looking into the strategies. Even if you're in a tax lien certificate state, maybe you don't invest all of your money into it, but maybe it's worth it, especially if they have some type of live auction, to attend a tax lien sale. But even if you don't, there can be states around you that have opportunity. And so, hopefully we've given you an idea of properties that have sold and a couple of properties that are currently on the upset bid process. In fact, that's one thing that we do is we add upset bid list to our auction calendar, because in a way those properties are still in play. Go ahead and return this back to you, Shade, and we can start kind of going through the rest of it.
All right, let's see here. Let's go from here. All right, well, on to the next part here. So for the next part of tonight, we're going to be discussing redemption deeds here for a minute. Now, redemption deeds are something we do talk about on a regular basis. And honestly, when we first started, I really kind of looked down on redemption deeds, especially now that I kind of look back and I realize that I really snubbed my nose at them. But there are a lot of opportunities with redemption deeds. Now, they are essentially tax deeds that are sold with a redemption period that are attached to them. But there's more to it than just that. There are different rules that can change things and make things advantageous for investors. Also, the price the properties sell for can change a bit because there is a time period attached to the property after purchase where you may not be able to sell it. So if you've got to wait for 6 months, that brings down the price from what it would if you could just turn around and sell the property immediately. So that can also create good opportunities. But yeah, essentially we call them kind of a hybrid between the two because they're essentially tax deeds that are treated a little bit like liens. They have the ability to redeem, which also means there has to be a penalty rate or some kind of a rate of return if it does happen to redeem. And so, and there's actually more states that use redemption deeds than I originally thought. It's kind of a bigger category. But some of the more familiar states are states like Georgia and Texas, and thinking about a few others here. Well, I'm sure we'll be talking about some of them here tonight. But the thing about redemption periods for redemption deeds is they tend to be shorter than the redemption periods for liens. So they'll start as short as 2 months, and about the longest you'll find is 3 years. 2 years for homestead properties there in Texas, 6 months for most properties there. It's 1 year for Georgia and their properties. But again, any area that has a redemption period is also going to have either an interest rate return or a flat rate, a penalty that will be paid out if the property happens to redeem. So if redemption occurs, you should make a pretty good flat rate, of return on your money. That ranges between different states, but it should be at least 10 to 12% or more. And in one thing that's also unique about redemption deed states is Texas is the only state that does this, but they extend ownership rights during the redemption period, which is kind of weird. It means, you go to the auction, you buy the property at auction, and they actually give you the power to take possession of the property. You just can't sell it immediately. So you can take immediate possession of the property after the sale. You just don't have the power to sell it immediately. So, that's one thing that only Texas does. Nobody else has anything like that.
Yeah, well, when we're talking about redemption deeds, they're not created equally. There's going to be differences between the different redemption deed states, and so we've kind of categorized all of these different type of properties where you're essentially getting some type of deed, or you have a higher percentage of ownership. Usually, you're going to use some type of premium bid method. So when we're talking about the difference between a tax lien certificate, well, tax liens you're usually going to earn just an interest rate return. So if it was an 18% return, you would essentially win a percent or earn a percent and a half per month. So if it redeemed after 6 months, you would earn a 9% return. They're not going to give you any type of ownership rights, which some of these states like Texas that Shay just explained will, where you'll have ownership right during that redemption period. But the biggest difference is that most tax lien certificates are going to redeem before going through the foreclosure process. Over 95% of tax liens redeem. That means that 5%, only 5% of those end up in property ownership. Because of it, with tax lien certificates, we're usually going to need to do less research than we would with a redemption deed. When we're talking about redemption deeds, some of these states are going to offer a penalty, like Texas or Georgia, where it doesn't matter when it redeems, you're going to go ahead and make that flat fee. Others will offer an interest rate. But one of the key aspects of redemption deeds is we're going to need to do more research because we're going to have a lot higher chance of ownership. In fact, in some of these states where it's got a 60-day redemption period, or even in Texas where it has a 6-month redemption period, a lot of times that may be already a couple of months in before the auction. So we're going to have a lot higher chance of actually acquiring those properties with a redemption deed, which means that we're going to need to research those properties more before actually bidding on them and participating in the auction.
Yeah, essentially, we have to research them just like tax deeds, but also understanding some of the other aspects that go into redemption deeds, like the redemption period. Now, redemption deeds are generally sold by premium bid, just highest bidder wins, but the opening bid is usually the combined total for all the taxes that were owed while it was basically building up. So it's usually 1 to 2 years worth of taxes, that are combined and included in that, depending on the area that you are, that you're at. But what also can change is when exactly you are recorded on the deed after you win. So basically the property's bid up in price. If you're the high bidder, you win. But in some cases, they're not going to record your name just yet because you still have to wait the redemption period. And if they recorded your name, it would basically transfer ownership of the property, and you could turn around and do it. So what they do is it's like they have you mostly recorded, but you're just not quite submitted yet. And they're not going to do that until the redemption period expires. And so uh, it helps to become familiar with some of these areas and how they work, so that you can become more familiar with protocols and steps that you can take here with properties like this.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's one of the advantages of being a member and having access to the different state guides, whether that be through your home study program or through the state guides online, is it gives you the ability to review exactly how that state is and maybe say, actually, this is too long a redemption period here. I'm more interested in Connecticut, for example, that has a shorter redemption period. In fact, we're actually going to review a Connecticut auction coming up here in the pre-sale review. But to kind of give you an idea of how this works is most of these are going to have a premium bid method. In fact, Louisiana was the last holdout, which was using an old form of bidding called bid down the ownership, and they're moving over to a premium bid method, which means that let's say the property starts at a $10,000 opening bid and it ends up selling for $20,000, the investor will go ahead and pay that $20,000, and that additional $10,000 is what's called the overbid. In fact, if you've heard of overages or excess proceeds, that's kind of where that comes from. So when we're talking about redemption deeds, we're not going to be bidding down the interest rate or anything like that. We're going to be bidding up the price of the property, which makes it closer to a tax deed. In fact, like Shade mentioned, a lot of these properties are going to be recorded in your name, or they'll go ahead and create the deed and not record it until after the redemption period is passed. But we need to research and bid on these properties like we're going to be the owner. Because in some cases, I think you've got and this is just my guess from experience, but a 70% chance in some of these auctions to actually acquire the property. So based on that, we're going to need to go ahead and do our research. And worst case scenario, we're going to make a great interest rate return on our money, because most of these are going to have a pretty good return. But we're still going to go through stage 1, 2, and 3 due diligence, especially if it's going to have a shorter redemption period. We're going to still get on-site evaluations if we're going to acquire the property in 60 days.
One thing that's kind of interesting about redemption deed states as well is that once the owner has lost the property, to the auction and it's in the redemption period, it tends to be very difficult for them to redeem the property once in that redemption period, because it's not like just redeeming a lien. They have their original bill, which is now bigger because it went to auction, plus, whatever the penalty is going to have to be. So it kind of balloons up to a fairly large amount that makes it even more difficult for people to pay, which increases the chances, that it results in just ownership, and that, it doesn't end up paying off, last minute. It's essentially why you always have to bid on these things like you are just bidding on tax deed properties, because like Steve was saying, you've got probably a 50-50 shot of owning any particular redemption deed you bid on.
Yeah, in fact, we were looking over some properties that sold in Texas last night with our coaching students. We couldn't believe how many good deals are picked up in some of these redemption deed auctions. Now, as far as the penalties, some are going to be penalty states and some are going to be interest rate states. Now, how the penalties work is it doesn't matter when the property owner redeems within that redemption period, you're going to make a full flat penalty rate. So in Texas, in Georgia. There's a number of other states as well where it doesn't matter if it redeems the very next day. You purchase the property on a Tuesday, they come in on Wednesday, you're still going to make 25% of the return on your money in Texas, or 20% in Georgia. So it's not like an interest rate return where it's going to be spread out. You're going to make that full penalty rate, which makes it a pretty good investment. Either you're going to get the property, and in some cases you're going to have a higher chance. Now in a state like Tennessee, maybe it's a 50-50 shot, or maybe even a little bit less than that, but we're still going to have a lot higher chance of getting those properties. When it comes to the redemption periods, usually, like Shade mentioned, they're going to be quite a bit less. Most of the redemption deeds are going to be 1 year or less.
Yeah, in fact, some of them are quite a bit less than that. But we talked a little bit about Texas. We talked a little bit about Georgia. 6 months for Texas, or 2 years if it's homestead or farm land. And in Georgia, we have the 1 year period here. Now, let's talk about some of the other redemption deed states that exist, because we've talked about Georgia and Texas, but we also have Delaware that have a 15% rate they pay, Hawaii at 12, Louisiana at 12, Tennessee at 10. Tennessee is probably like the lowest, but what's interesting about that is there can be good opportunities to buy properties outright because they don't attract as many investors, because their rate isn't as high as some of the other states out there. And so there tends to be kind of more opportunities that way. Connecticut at 18%, and Rhode Island at 12 to 16%.
Yeah, in fact, a couple of weeks ago, we went through and looked at the Delaware auction, and we looked at some properties in one of the last podcasts, and it was interesting to see because there really is good opportunity. Now, some of these counties have moved online. Tennessee has moved online. That's made it pretty pretty desirable, even with that lower interest rate return, because a 10% interest rate is still a pretty good return on most of your investments. Now, what we're going to do now for the pre-auction review, we're actually going to go ahead and look at one of these redemption deed states, and we're going to look at Connecticut auctions. So we're going to talk a little bit about how Connecticut works so that you understand how it works, how their tax sale systems run, and then we're going to go look at some properties that are coming up for sale in an upcoming auction.
Yeah. Now, Connecticut is classified as a redemption deed state. One thing that's different about Connecticut is rather than having their counties or local governments like that, they always have cities and towns that are collecting property taxes and are responsible for conducting their tax sales. So that's generally who is conducting the sales, which means you tend to have more sales, because you have smaller governments, that are conducting them. There's a larger number of auctions that happen, but a lot of these are probably in-person sales, so if you live in that area, again, it's kind of like we were talking about with North Carolina, where it makes sense to take advantage of it because, there's a limited number of people there that can make it to the auction, and that is going to lead to pretty good deals. So beyond that, though, it's like other states. Opening bid consists of the taxes that are owed. They use premium bidding, and the redemption period itself is 6 months or 60 days if the property is abandoned or blighted, as they say. But the deeds that do redeem pay an interest rate return of 18% annually or 1.5% per month. So rather than paying out a flat penalty, they pay an interest rate return like Florida's, where it all depends on how long it takes before the property, redeems. But following the redemption period, you don't have to do anything special. The deeds are mailed to the winning bidder, and basically, the government is going to record but they leave it unrecorded for a period of 6 months, though. So that's one thing to keep in mind is that it's not going to be in your name for that first 6 months until after that.
Yeah, exactly. So anytime within that 6 month redemption period, if we're looking at properties that still have people living in them for any type of abandoned property or vacant property, it's only going to be 60 days. And the county will go ahead and have that deed created, but they're not going to record it until that redemption period is passed. Now, 60 days after the original auction day, the tax collector is going to send out a second notice to them. It's kind of like your last warning notice. They're going to go ahead and say, okay, your property sold, 2 months ago at the tax sale. Here's how much it sold for. Here's how much interest you're going to owe, and kind of give them the last chance to go ahead and make due on it. And then once that 6 month redemption period is passed, the county will go ahead and record it into your name, and you'll be able to access the property just like any other type of tax deed. So you're either going to make a pretty good interest rate return, or you're going to acquire that property within a 6 month period of time.
Oh, actually, let me see here. Let me do this. Are we starting from the bottom and working our way up, or are we going from the top down?
You can just either way. I mean, if you were going to do them all at once, we'd start at the bottom, or you can just click on them, whatever you want to do. You got to look at the other tab, though.
All right, here for Connecticut. What we're going to do here is okay. So we've got 3 different things here. Here's the notice for the sale that we have. This is a Connecticut notice. So we can see there's the address of the property that we have right there.
Yeah, we can see the opening bid amount there for $11,517. And this is an auction that's going to be coming up next month on the 23rd. And you can see there that it's an in-person auction where it's going to be held there at the county courthouse. So this is one of those properties where you really need to be there in person to be able to acquire it.
Oh, what's interesting is, you can almost read through just the different parts of this. I mean, they have a part here for surviving encumbrances, and it really kind of explained much about how the tax sale works. So, this property will be sold free and clear to the winning bidder, subject only to number 1, taxes and sewer water charges laid by the levy municipality, which were not yet due and payable at the time of the levy, which is the date accompanying the signature on the first notice of the sale filed. And then number 2, the accrued taxes and water sewer charges Number 3, any federal tax lien recorded until 30 days before the date, which is 6 months after the auction date, except as extinguished pursuant to federal law. And let's see, anything else they have here? Well, they've got up to 9. Oh, they've got up to 11 things here.
Yeah, most of it's just pretty much the state law where they're going to go through the judicial foreclosure process. It's going to eliminate everything other than IRS liens and different types of city or water charges. This is who they went ahead and sent out notices to. You can see the different places. There's a bunch of different addresses there. It kind of looks based on this. This is probably not an owner-occupied property. Maybe it's something like a rental. And it just kind of goes through all of the notes. In fact, every single one of these kind of have their own page like this. And we actually just got this list off of the auction calendar on the website.
Oh, that's interesting. They say here that postponements will not occur because an owner or encumbrance or requests it makes a partial payment or arranges a private sale. Basically, they're just saying they're not going to postpone it unless you just pay it off here. But here's some of the other things here. Interested bidders to attend the sale in person, bring ID and a deposit of $5,000 in certified funds. That'll be easy enough. Now let's look at the other things here, see what the property is. So 118 Spring Road here, we're looking at this house right here. We can kind of see it.
Yeah, and like we always talk about, we're going to look at the outside. We're going to look when that date was taken, and that's going to help us decide if this is a property we want to research or not. Now, in this case, we're looking at a photo from July 2025. It still looks to be in pretty good shape. It looks like it, even though we don't see a car out front, it looks like it's probably occupied, if not upkept. So as far as that's concerned, everything looks like a pretty good to us. So if we were interested in bidding it, that's where we'd go ahead, do some more, go through stage 1, stage 2 due diligence, and do an on-site evaluation. But I believe this is actually a duplex or a triplex or something like that. It's a multifamily.
Yeah, it's pretty big. It's bigger than I realized there when we were first glancing at it. Let's look at the value. So it's valued at $358,000, a 5-bedroom, 2-bath, built in 1900.
Yeah, so you
20,
can see.
yeah, 2,300 square feet.
Yeah, well, the 5-bedroom, 2-bath, I'm thinking it's probably a 3-bedroom, 1-bath, 2-bedroom, 1-bath type setup. And there may have been improvements since then. In fact, if you're looking at the outside, even though it's an older property, we can see that there's been all kinds of updates to it. When we're looking there at the Google Street View, we could see that the windows had been replaced, that the siding had been redone, that the roof looked good. So even though it's an older property, everything else looks really good on it. In fact, it almost looks like it's got a cement foundation.
Yeah, it does look like
Or maybe
a.
they just, put something over top of it. But
Yeah, it could be like an older, something more like what do they call it? The bricks they use when they block them up. But it looks like it's been, at the very least, they put a concrete layer over the outside of it, and so it looks like a foundation. But the property itself looks pretty good. It's nice. It has high value, and we know the opening bid is not. It's at what 11,000. I think we were saying it was. Yeah, 11,500. So it starts at a very low percentage of its value, with it being valued at 300 and something. It's basically starting at like 3% of value. I mean, it is a tiny amount that it's starting at, but that gives it plenty of room to bid up. And it also looks like the property has, it's old, but it's been continuously lived in. So most, lots of things in the inside probably work. I'm sure it needs lots of work, but it's probably at the very least usable for the most part.
yeah, well, looked at the time, it was still in great shape. So if the condition looks anything like it does now, then it would be a property that we could be interested in bidding on. And if you were to acquire this property for 25, 30 cents on the dollar, it would probably be a good investment. At that high of a value, it may even be worth a little bit more, or worth picking it up more than that, just based on the fact that the value is so high.
Now we've got a second property here. It is opening up at 9,200. Yeah, and we can see we've got the full address of it right there. And we've got the property right here we're looking at.
Yeah, it looks like it's in a, kind of a neighborhood. We'd have to check the years, but kind of looks like they're between 60s to 80s. Maybe it's a little bit older than that, but you can see that they put on some solar panels on it. Quite a
Yeah,
bit of solar panels, really.
yeah, the whole roof is covered there in solar panels, but it is a good neighborhood. I'm sure the property here has decent value. Look at that, it's a value at 300,000. It's only 1,200 square feet. That is a pretty valuable property, and it starts, fairly low amount there comparatively. Uh, it would make it pretty easy to bid on these. I'm surprised, the numbers are this good with all these properties.
Yeah, well, if you go back and look at the Google view, one thing I was kind of looking at is that, you can see that, there's a kind of a short bus or a little school bus parked there. Maybe there's somebody living there at the time, but it does kind of look like some of the yard isn't up kept as some of the surrounding neighborhoods. Now, this is from July 2025, but at that time there was still garbage cans there, so it still looks like it was occupied. Maybe it's a owner, maybe it's a renter. We could look a little bit more into it and see who the parties are to figure that out. But either way, we're looking at a property that's valued over 300,000, starting at a fraction of its value, and so there's plenty of bidding room to be able to bid up this property because the value is so high.
Yeah, very interesting. So this one starts at about 20,000. So a higher amount compared to everything we've looked at so far. And not necessarily a higher value, but let's see what it looks like. So here we can see, yeah, it's $20,000. We've got that full address here on it, and I do like their notices. I think their notices here are kind of nice. We can see who was notified there. All right, so let's take a look here. Now, the house, like the others, this is in a really nice neighborhood. It looks like it's probably a property from the 60s, maybe 70s, I suppose. And let's go down there and look. So August of 2022, it's not quite as new. It's about 4 years older. But what we can see at the time is that it was occupied at the time, and in really pretty good shape. I mean, the shingles probably need to be replaced, but the house itself looks like it's in really good working order. Another thing we can notice, see that those are vinyl windows. Those are vinyl windows, and you see that the front entry door set up there. They did this at the same time they did all the vinyl on the outside. So they did a major remodel on the property, including at least the windows and the vinyl, on the outside. It looks like it still needs probably some new shingles at least, but some money has been invested in it already.
Yeah, well, and it'd be interesting to see. That's one thing we can always see with the on-site evaluations is what has happened to the property, since this, because this is a little bit older photo. But still, at $20,000, that opening bid amount is what, 7%? I'm not great at off the head math like that, but it's still going to be less than 10 cents on the dollar opening bid amount. Plenty of profit margin, a good single-family home coming up in the tax sale.
Yeah. By the way, Matthew, can you legally have bidding in-person representatives, or does that require a lawyer? So actually, uh, yeah, it probably does depend on the state because some states have different requirements. But having somebody else bid on your behalf, though, isn't necessarily that hard. I mean, you could hire an attorney there to do it, or you could also, I mean, there's other ways to do it. Yeah, like we've done it on behalf of each other, or if you've got somebody out there in the area that you could send by. It's one of those things where eventually, if you get working with a realtor well enough, they're making good money. You could send a realtor to the auction to buy properties. But yeah, it's something you could potentially do. You may want to ask the county about it specifically because they can usually tell you, how you can go about placing bids if you can't be there in person on the day of the sale.
Yeah, it's going to completely depend on the state. A lot of the states are really easy to work with. In fact, we have somebody that goes out and bids at online auction, at on-site auctions for us, and he's just essentially doing it kind of as an employee. And so it'll kind of depend on the individual state on how easy they are to work with. Now, this property here, this one's opening up with an opening bid of 65,000. but it's actually a big apartment complex. If we go look at the street view, you can see how big it is. There's 62 bedrooms in there, I believe, or six. So I think that
It's that whole building,
yeah.
everything. Oh my goodness.
So I think that there's probably between 20 to 30 units in there, is my guess.
Holy cow. So these are August of 2022 images that we're looking at. Some of the windows are kind of open, but yeah, it does look like it's occupied here. And you can see the parking for it. Yeah, there's your entry that most people with the property using. You see all the parking back here in the back. That's an interesting property. What is this property valued at, I wonder?
I'm not sure. I didn't get into it. This isn't really showing you the value. They're just pulling it up.
It's 27,000 square feet.
Yeah, it's a massive. Well, and you can see it's got 62 bedrooms. So,
Hmm.
I mean, even if there were 3 bedrooms, you just divide that by 3. If they're 2 bedrooms, you've got 30 plus units in there.
Yeah, that is, and it was built in 1888, but
Yeah, it's
looking,
old.
yeah, I mean, yeah, it's old, but if people are still living in it right now, then they had to have been staying on top of maintenance and repairs in order for it to still, be usable. It's also a nice, brick building, fairly simple supplies and things that last a long time. Because I had no idea it was that old.
Well, you can see that it got purchased last in 1992 for $255,000, but that was 30 plus years ago. So, it's been in the same owner for a long time. Uh, you know, they've owned it for the last 30 plus years, maybe, getting to the end. But either way, it's got to be worth. I mean, we're looking at homes that are worth 300 grand. So even though it needs a lot of work, it's got to be worth a couple of $1 million, I'm estimating. I didn't get a chance to really look too much into the value of it, but I would assume that it's got to be worth at least several $1 million.
Yeah, I mean, 27,000 square feet is crazy. I mean, and 62 bedrooms, I mean, yeah, there's probably at least 20 to 30 units in there. My goodness, I mean, this is one of those things where just one of these, could net you a whole lot of income, if you were collecting rent from 20 or 30 different people, and something like that. It could do pretty well. That's kind of an interesting property. It could also be a total nightmare, just being honest, because
Not at 60 grand though.
yeah, yeah,
I mean,
no,
that's the
no,
thing.
no,
I mean,
no, not at 60
it could be
grand.
a huge pain, but it could also be huge profit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it at 60,000, it wouldn't be a nightmare, but you could get inside of it and realize, that it needs all kinds of work. If you were into it a lot of money, that might be a problem, but it wouldn't be a problem if you got into it for tax sale prices, which this will probably sell for under 10% of value.
I don't know. We'll have to
Yeah.
see. I,
What?
I think I think it's older, but we're still looking at it was occupied at the time. There's still garages, even though it's older. It's been upkept. Like you can see that they've got air conditioning, so it's not got central air. There's a lot of things that it could need, but depending on the market here, the each one of those units could be renting out for $1,500. Based on, or even at the low $1,000. But looking at the rental here, rental's expensive. So that's a property that I don't know how much you could make a year off of, but a huge amount of
20 or 30,000 a month.
at least, if not even more than that.
Yeah, that is pretty crazy. All right, let's see here. We've got another property here we'll look at real quick. $18,000 is what it opens up for. And this is the house right here that we're looking at right off of Center Street. And this is it straight ahead. July of 2025. And there's a lot about this property that is very desirable. And we can see that it is it more than one house?
No, I think it's just kind of, it's got, if it is, they've been molded together, but it does have that nice newer garage. You can see new roof, new siding, new vinyl. Uh,
Yeah, they've done some additions on the house, like over here on the on the roof, and this new garage, and looks like space above it as well. And uh, yeah, I mean, this property has probably. 418,000, in value, 2,300 square feet. Yeah, that is a really nice property, and it starts very low. I mean, it starts at 20,000. It's like 5% of this property's starting at 5%, of the property's value roughly. That's another great deal.
Yeah, starting at 18,600. So again, we're not sure what these are going to bid up to, but there's definitely going to be opportunity in this sale, and we're only looking through a portion of the properties that are essentially available on this list, with good opportunity. Now this one here is 105,000, but there's actually two different properties on it, and the value of this is massive.
Let's see. Oh, no. So we are looking at the Brickford Health Care Center.
That's one of them. Now scroll out a little bit further. It's also that building. Well, you see where that road, it's kind of covered. There's a building there in the back too as well. I don't know why it's looking so fuzzy, but where that road ends, there's another building back there as well. So it's, a couple of different buildings back there. One has an address, the 14, and then the other address as well.
So it's actually two separate properties.
Yeah, well, it's two properties kind of in the same complex.
I wonder what these are worth.
Millions. I mean, if you go down and look, it's a massive, massive building. It's obviously some kind of healthcare center, or was some kind of healthcare center. I couldn't tell if it was like a rest home, or if it's more of like a doctor's type office.
Is that it?
No, it's pulled you into the parking lot. It's that right there.
This thing?
Yeah, and it goes all the way back. And you see, so if you were to look back to the right, you could see the other building. See that building back there at the very end of that road?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
that, and then all of this. So I wasn't sure if it was a rest home. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Maybe it is, but I didn't look too much into it. And it goes all the way down to where the post office is at right here. So it goes back there quite a ways, which makes me think that it's a rest home.
Yeah, they've got big AC units, and the roof is all nicely done. And
Well, and the fact that it is a commercial property, we can look into what is this? What do they do there? Maybe it's an outpatient treatment
yeah,
center.
yeah, rehab. That's what it
Yeah,
is.
rehab center. So, we can look into a little bit more of the history. That can give us an idea. Is it still being run? Is it still in current use? What are the reviews on it? All that's going to make a difference. Maybe this is owned by them, or maybe they're renting this property. But I would guess this has to be worth 3 to 5 million. I'm just totally guessing. But the real estate prices here are quite high, and this is a big, big facility.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is really big, and it is a lot of square footage. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many square feet, but it's kind of like the last apartments we're looking at, where it's like 27,000. You're going to be dealing with a large number with this property, because it consists of so many buildings and so many rooms. That is interesting. When these kinds of deals come up in tax sales, uh, they're it, it, it's crazy the low percentage of value some of these could sell for, just because there's going to be a limited number of people that'll be bidding on these things. And so, yeah, there's huge opportunities with all of the properties that we've looked at tonight, I think.
And in fact, if you're looking at the county, one thing that is nice about here is that the county in this listing has provided us with, some of the details on it and who they're sending notices to. So as you're looking into the notice there, you can see that the different notices. But one thing I noticed is they have the Connecticut Water Company there, which makes me think maybe they have some water bills. You can see an IRS lien on it, or at least, they contacted the Internal Revenue Service. So it's very likely that this company is in some type of financial situation where they haven't paid the back taxes. They've got some different debts that are involved in there. Usually we would say the IRS will not, go after it. It'll depend on how much that is. It could be worth just paying off the lien, or seeing what the situation is. But you can see that there is some financial issues to it, in probably giving us a reason why it's coming up for sale.
Very interesting. Yeah, I do like these notices. I think these things are pretty handy.
Yeah, exactly. So that hopefully gives you guys kind of an idea of how Connecticut works, some of the properties that are coming up for sale. That's one thing that we do provide on tax sale support is we go out and we look at and we do searches each month of the different auctions in places like Connecticut that have these type of properties that are available and try to bring these and make them available to you for students within that area that would like to go out and participate in some of these sales. So I think what we're going to do now is we're going to actually go look at a bad deal review. This is kind of an interesting one. We're going to look at a couple of news articles, and there's a bunch of different stories. This was hit up on a bunch of different news stations and different stories on it, on this property in San Francisco, where it ended up this couple bought a property that they thought that they were going to be getting a new commercial rental property. Come to find out that they bought the alley next to their home. So we're going to go through and read a little bit of this article. There's a bunch of different articles on this, but it's kind of an interesting an interesting story because we see this happen all the time where people haven't done their due diligence. And this one's a little bit unique because San Francisco just targeted the people that lived around this property. So they had kind of a bunch of what I would call kind of junk properties for sale,
Hmm.
and they sent them out. So I think in this case, maybe they sent it to 5 or 6 different people that were surrounding in the area saying, hey, this property is coming up for sale. Well, they thought it was automatically going to be this commercial duplex when in reality they were actually buying just a little strip of land.
Yeah, it's crazy how assumptions can hurt you, when you just assume, that the property you're looking at is one thing without actually verifying or checking. And we can see them, they're actually standing, LMAQ and JJ stand at the entrance of Dirt Alley, which they accidentally purchased through the city auction. All right, so for about a month this spring, JJ Hollingsworth and Alan Mayhew thought they had bought a $1 million home in the Sunset for a mere $25,000. Yeah, I'm sure they thought they hit a home run there. Uh, how did they find themselves in this temporary euphoric state of mind? The married couple sealed bid for 1926 Kirkham Street had been declared the winner at a May auction held by the San Francisco tax collector for properties with years of unpaid property taxes. The two celebrated with friends and told longtime tenants of the two-unit building just across the alley from their 24th Avenue home, that they were the new landlords. But before they could collect their first rent check, they realized something wasn't right. The wake-up call came when the city refunded nearly all of the $8,000 they had paid for the transfer tax. That's when I figured it out. I don't own this house, Hollingsworth said. What do I own? After checking with a friend who's a real estate agent, Hollingworth learned that he had not bought 1924 to 1926 Kirkham Street, a semi-detached rental property with views of Martin Headlands and the top of Golden Gate Bridge. They were, in fact, the new owners of an 83-foot long, 7-foot wide road called Dirt Alley, complete with views of two-bedroom, three-bathroom duplex they had hoped to buy. How did this happen? Hollingsworth thought, followed quickly by, why would someone own this? They were shocked, then embarrassed, then pissed off.
Yeah. Well, and it goes on to talk about how they tried to get their money back, but and they tried to rescind the sale. In fact, last week we showed you guys a property where an investor spent over $500,000 on an easement property. I guess it was 2 weeks ago that they didn't have any use with. Well, they tried to get the tax collectors, the board of supervisors, to rescind the offer, which they weren't willing to do. And so, they were kind of upset about it, but really, in I think a little bit further down, they have some of the descriptions. You can see here, this is what they actually sent them. So what they did is this was a little different than just your regular tax sale. The city sent out notices to the people, to the surrounding property owners saying, hey, this property is coming up for sale. In fact, I think the average property at the sale was $432. So a bunch of these properties were picked up for $1, something like that. And if you can get a strip of land next to your lot, it could be worth it buying it for nothing. but they didn't really read the fine print or even look at the maps. They just saw the address and automatically thought the address was going to be this duplex, when in reality the address was just the closest address to the lot.
Well, and their comments kind of interesting. The first thing you said was, why would somebody own this? But if you've dealt with tax sales at all, it's clear that everybody owns some, every property you see is owned by somebody. And it doesn't mean, just because a property is there or that it's even owned doesn't mean it necessarily has value or use. There's a difference. All counties are going to end up with leftover pieces of property. Just kind of like we talked last week about the utility buildings, the utility complex, that was set up either for with cell phone towers in one case, and in the other case, it's like a city's water tower. But either way, it doesn't matter because you can't do anything with either one of those lots, which are basically only easement properties. Which is what they are. It's funny with this road. Yeah, I mean, they are complaining about it, but what is crazy about that is that, yeah, I mean, they're saying here, that I don't pick fights, said Hollingsworth, a self-described cowgirl who grew up in a cattle ranch in Colorado. I fight, but I don't pick them. But they sent them, maps like this plat map here that has the actual lot, that highlighted here. So I don't know how they could have got that wrong. But now they're mad at the county for not resending the sale, and they're willing to bring lawyers down. But I tell you what, the lawyers are not going to be able to do much for them because it's right there in the paperwork, and they clearly outline it over and over again. It's a buyer beware, buying as is. You do your own research in order to determine it. And they thought that they could step in and just buy the property, and that there wasn't anything more to it because they didn't understand tax sales at all.
Well, and they probably could have bought it for $10
Mm-hmm.
because it was whoever sent in. It was a sealed bid, so whoever had the highest bid. So they thought, well, we've got 25,000 extra that we could put into it to try to get it. We'll send in our sealed bid of 25,000. And if they would have sent a sealed bid for 200 or 300, because most of these properties sold for very cheap. I mean, in a way, they were kind of giving them away, or selling for them for very cheap. I think the most expensive one sold for, besides this one, sold for 11,000, but on average they sold for about $400. So I think, they kind of sent these out. Hey, these are properties, or these are kind of, strips of land, stuff like that next to your properties. If somebody's interested, they can go ahead and bid on them. And they sent them kind of all of the instructions, the, the numbers. And
Yeah, that was the problem. That's the problem, is that they invited the homeowners, to participate in the sale. That was what got them, because they thought, hey, this has worked well in other places. We're just going to send the surrounding neighbors, a little sealed bid thing here, with some auction information. And the problem is that, lots of people think, hey, I'd like to invest in some real estate, but they don't really know anything about what they're getting into. And so that is why they ended up with people that were showing up like they're buying regular real estate, only to find out that they're in a tax sale, and they're totally different things.
well, yeah, and they also offered a webinar. They sent them in the instructions on it, and I actually think that it makes sense because who's going to most likely use a strip of land next to their home? The person who owns that home. So I think the city's idea was just to, hey, we're going to send these out to just the people that are next to or bordering this property, and we'll accept whatever offer is the highest. So, there was a number of different properties that only sold for $1, and so I don't think that it was a big money making scheme, at least from their aspect. But, these people didn't review what it was. They just saw that address without looking at any of the additional document or participating in the webinar.
Huh, interesting. Well,
The good news from them is I saw an updated to this story, and there was some artist person that ended up buying it for 26,000, so they got their $25,000 back.
oh wow.
But I think it was almost kind of just somebody that saw the publicity about it and wanted to paint it or do something like that. And so they ended up buying it for them. So they actually ended up a lot better off than most investors would, and because unless it got this publicity, they couldn't put that on the market and sell it for 25 grand, especially where there's an easement in place that allows people to access that alleyway.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, yeah, they're talking about their 25,000 right here that they decided to use on it. And yeah, they're standing in front of the building they thought they were buying versus what they actually bought.
Yeah, and they were pretty upset about it, feel like they were cheated. But especially in this case, I think that they were, the county actually sent them maps and details on it with a little bit of research. And the good thing is anyone that is listening to this call, shouldn't be making this mistake, because we talk about these type of things so you guys are aware of them and know what to look for when we're looking at tax sale property.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're basically saying, hey, we would have regretted it if we didn't try to go into it because, they got the information and thought it was an opportunity, that was coming up. So it makes sense as to why they jumped on it. They just didn't know, what they were doing. And in the excitement, they missed critical pieces of information the like the plat map and I mean, you couldn't imagine trying to buy a property like that without looking up the county records for it, and figuring out what exactly it is. They also skipped over the part of the letter stating that the auction was for parcels rendered unusable by their size, location, or other conditions. So yeah, they were basically like junk lots, and they told them they're pretty much they were junk lots up front. These are unusable because of size, location, or other issues. And so, yeah, that is essentially what San Francisco is getting rid of was just kind of the junk properties. I mean, this is the letter that they sent out for it. So, yeah, I mean, there's really no reason to think that they're selling $1 million you know properties.
Yeah, well, and they only sent it to the people that it applied to. So it wasn't just like they were offering them to everyone there on the market. You can see that, 20 sold between $10 to 11,000. The medium sales price was 485.
Their
Four that
$25,000
sold for
bid looks so crazy because it threw off the prices of the whole auction so much.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So luckily they found somebody that was willing to buy it just for the sake of buying it. But in most cases, if you buy these kind of properties, you're going to be stuck with an unusable property. So we just want to make sure that you guys are aware of this type of stuff and know what to look for.
They aren't going to close the street. A posted sign says it's a fire lane or charge neighbors to use it. We don't want enemies.
Yeah, there were some news stories about it as well. But
It's kind of funny.
we thought it was kind of interesting and probably a good one to talk about as a bad deal review this week.
Yeah, it's quite the long story here, that they did. The tax collector's office does not take a position on whether the sale should be rescinded. It doesn't profit from the sales if there are excess. Well, that doesn't mean they don't have a hand in how the sales operate. They may not be personally like profiting off of it, but I'm sure counties see they don't really have a choice either though. The county treasurer can't just say, well, let's not worry about trying to collect taxes on all these properties here that are rolling through. It just the system just is what it is, and there's always going to be a certain number of junk properties that are cycling through, county tax sale systems, just by virtue of how the system works. So, um,
Well, you can
yeah,
see right there in the case of Dirt Alley, the firm called Atlas Realty Company, which had owned the property since 1974, stopped paying property taxes on at least 20 years ago.
yeah,
And so the county's just been sitting on it, the city not getting any property taxes for it, offered it to the neighbors, which would be the only people that might have an interest in the property. I mean, if I lived in had that property right next to it and that was my alley and I could pick it up for a couple $100, it just makes sense to do it.
yeah,
And I think that's kind of what their idea was, but it's so important that we read the fine print. I mean, this one here is obvious, but it's so important that we read all the rules in any type of auction that we're participating in. Because if we're doing an online auction, there may be, and usually is going to be, some type of additional fee that we're going to have to pay over our opening bid amount that's going to be charged by the auction company. That's going to be something important to know. There's always going to be rules and regulations in every auction. So it's so important that we go through all of that information before bidding on property so that we know exactly what's taking place. The last thing we want to do is be surprised like these people were.
yeah. Yeah, well, and if they had just joined tax sale support, before they had submitted that $25,000 bid, we could have saved them all of that, and maybe help them find some actual properties here, because I don't think there's anything that was that great at that sale. They were looking at the wrong sale altogether.
Well, it wasn't even really a sell. It was a sealed bid just for the property owners that were, it wasn't the type of auction that was auctioned off in a regular auction. So definitely a little bit different. But we appreciate you guys participating in the webinar. We'll go ahead and get the replay out for you. But hopefully you guys have learned something tonight. We've looked at some good deals. We've looked at some good opportunities coming up. And then we've talked about a great form of tax sale investing. And like Shade said, I think that we both kind of snubbed our noses a little bit to redemption deeds in the beginning, and especially because you had to be there in person. But with all of these areas, Texas, Tennessee, and many others adding online auctions, it really gives us an opportunity to participate in some of these redemption deed auctions.
Yeah, I mean, there's never been more opportunities than there is right now, and it's never been easier than it is right now. And it just keeps getting, a little bit easier, a little bit smoother to go through and to do this. And you could, do this. You could be doing auctions nonstop with all the online auctions that exist out there now. So yeah, there's so much opportunity. We're excited for you. This has been fun tonight. I've enjoyed this podcast. Look forward to coming back again next week.
Yep. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great week.
We'll see you later.